Hey everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how I make my homemade bread. Now, homemade bread is great because you know exactly what's going into what you're eating. It's also something fun to do and you can save quite a lot of money by making bread yourself. So, what will you need to make your own bread? The first thing is obviously going to be flour. Now, I'm using King Arthur flour. It's one of the few flours that is unbleached. You can use white flour for this, or you can also mix it half and half with white flour and the whole wheat flour. We will also be using sugar, 1 packet of yeast, obviously some measuring cups. This is simply vegetable oil or soybean oil, and then we have the salt. And then we're going to mix that all together in this big bowl. So let's go through it step by step. Now the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put 1 cup of warm water into the bowl. Now the important thing to notice is that this water should be warm so that the yeast can become activated, but it shouldn't be so hot that it kills the yeast. So just start your tap, let the water run until your finger starts to feel a little bit warm. If you put your finger in the tap and it starts burning, the water is definitely too hot. So let's just get 1 cup of the warm water. Alrighty, there we have 1 cup of warm water. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add our yeast into the warm water. And sometimes people will do what's called proofing the yeast. And that's just making sure that the yeast is alive. So we're going to pour our yeast into the packet, and then I'm going to show you a really cool trick to instantly proof your yeast and make sure that it's still active. Now what you're going to notice is that we're going to put this yeast into the warm water, and at first you're not really going to see anything happen. It's going to be hard to tell if the yeast is alive. You're not going to understand what proofing is, but I'm going to show you that as soon as we add 1 teaspoon of sugar, you're going to see the yeast start absorbing this sugar and start eating it, and you're going to see the byproducts of that. Let me just grab a quick teaspoon of sugar, and you're going to see, pay very close attention, you're going to see that as I sprinkle this in, the yeast starts foaming up. So ready? You can see, especially along the edges here, you can see how wherever I put the sugar, the yeast, see how the yeast is coming together and it's starting to foam up? And that's a good way that you know your yeast is still alive. Okay, so we have added our yeast, we have added the sugar, we do not need that anymore. We need 2 cups of flour. Now the thing is, if you're using the white flour, it seems that the dough doesn't absorb as much of the water, so if you're using just white flour, you might need slightly more than 2 cups. And if you're using the white flour mixed half and half with the whole wheat flour, you might be able to get away with using right at 2 cups. So I generally like to be healthy, so we are going to mix this half and half with the white flour and the whole wheat. So let's add 1 cup of the white flour. And then let's get 1 cup of the whole wheat flour. Again, this is going to be King Arthur brand flour as well, just because, like I said, they're one of the few companies that does not bleach their flour. So there's half, and there is our full cup of the whole wheat flour. Set that aside. Now what we want is 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And I like putting the salt in quite a bit after the yeast, just to give the yeast time to proof. I read somewhere that the salt can have a negative effect on the yeast, that it won't do as well. So I like to give the yeast a little bit of time to start proofing and start multiplying before I add in the salt. And then lastly, 1 to 2 teaspoons of the vegetable oil. And the simple way to do that, I never measure it, I simply use 1 capful. So let's just pour that in there. And now we are ready to start mixing it. Now I say mixing because right now if you look at it, our bread is does not even look like bread. It looks more like a baking recipe. So we'll show you a look at the bowl. We're going to have to start mixing everything together at first, and then once the dough starts to get more of a texture, we can actually begin to knead the dough. You can see maybe a little bit more drier and crumbly, maybe a little bit more soft. But once you kind of get it in the general form, then you can start gradually putting your hand in there and starting to mash everything together. Now, remember that you can always add water, but you can never take water out of the mixture once you put it in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start kneading this just for a little bit. And the motion for kneading doesn't have to be that complicated. There's no special technique. You can just simply press down with your hand. You can move it around. You can take two hands. You can really do whatever you want. But what I like to do is knead for about 8 minutes. So I'll put on, a song on my phone. I'll listen to it while I'm kneading. Maybe 2 songs. Each song's about 3 to 4 minutes. So if you listen to 2 songs on the radio, then that's the time that you need to knead. So just keep kneading that dough. And again, we are not anywhere close to done. I'm just showing you this. We will speed through everything, and then we will come back when the dough is finished. So let's just keep on kneading, and I don't think I'm going to have to add any water to this. Remember, if your dough is too dry, it's really not the end of the world. If it's too wet, it's not going to rise properly. So for me, this dough is going to be just fine. Now there's a variety of tests that you can do to know when you're done kneading your dough. Now the first thing that you'll notice is that the dough is very, very smooth. That's one good test. The second good test, and the one that I use most frequently, your dough is good when there's nothing left on your hands. And if you remember when we started kneading the dough, my hands were all messy. I mean, there's a little bit here, but for the most part, all of the dough that was on my hands has been absorbed. And then one other test that you can do, if you poke the dough, it should spring back to its original texture. I've heard some people say you should be able to stretch it out and see light through the other side. I don't usually do that test, but just go for about 5 to 8 minutes, look for a smooth appearance, check your hands, and that should give you a really good estimate on whether or not you're done kneading your dough. So now that the dough is good, we're simply going to place it in the bowl, and we're going to wait for about 30 minutes to an hour, depending. Really what we're looking for is for the dough to double in size. We don't really care so much about the time as we're looking for that doubling in size. So we'll let this sit for just a minute, and then we will come back and finish up. Hey guys, just got back from a quick run, maybe about 30 to 40 minutes, and you can see that the dough is about doubled in size. So that's really good. That's where we want it. Again, you can see that the top is very smooth. Everything's looking good. And again, don't worry too much about whether it's 30 minutes, whether it's 45 minutes. As long as your dough is plumped up and it's about double in size, you really should be good, because we're going to let the dough rise one more time. So what we're going to do is get a little pan that needs to be cleaned off for sure. So now what we're going to do, we're just going to give a quick spray on the cooking sheet. We're going to take the bread, and what we're going to do is we're going to gently compress it, and we're going to separate it roughly in half. All right, so we have it about roughly in half. And now we want to kind of shape it into a loaf. Now this, we're going to put it on the baking tray, right? And we're going to let it rise for, again, about another 30 minutes, or again, until it's doubled. So this is really going to be the final kind of shape of our loaf. So if you want it to look like a really pretty loaf, this is where you would want to take some time and make it look really pretty. I've done bread in very different variations. For some times you can make a little ball, and then you can put soup inside of it if you want. But for the most part, just the standard looking loaf is going to be fine. So this recipe that I'm showing you all, it makes about 2 loaves. And again, we're going to set these as far apart on the tray as we can, because they are going to expand. So we'll put these again to rise for about 20 to 30 minutes, or until they're doubled in size. And again, one thing that I didn't mention earlier is the warmer your room temperature is, the faster that these are going to rise. So currently it's Tennessee, it's in the middle of summer, so these are going to rise very rapidly. So let them rise, and then we will get back for the final step. All Alrighty, we have been letting the dough rise for about 20 minutes, and you can see that it is expanded. It is about doubled in size again. So our oven is preheating to 450 degrees. And you'll want to bake your bread for 450 degrees for anywhere from about 16 minutes to 18 minutes. I find 18 minutes gives it a nice crust, whereas 16 minutes keeps it a little bit softer without that much of a crust. Now, you can do a lot with your bread. You can do an egg wash, you can put some butter and sesame seeds. There's a lot of different things you can do with the bread, but this is just a very basic tutorial, and really the only thing that I do with the bread is I make a little slice along the top so that the bread expands and so that the heat can come out without exploding and making holes in the bread. So you can really do whatever different designs you want. I really usually, and again, this is not a sharp knife. You should really have a sharp knife. So it's going to pull and kind of tear the edge of the bread. But what you want to do is you want to make some slits along the bread so that it expands. So this is just a lengthwise slit, and then of course you can do kind of the traditional curved slits. I'm sure you've seen something like this. And again, if you really have a sharp knife, it's going to help, because see how the bread's kind of pulling? It doesn't make a difference as far as releasing the heat, but if you're trying to make it look really pretty, then this is going to affect the texture a little bit. So let's pop that in the oven, and I'll see you guys in 17 minutes. All right, it's been 17 minutes, and we're going to take the bread out of the oven now. And we see that it came out looking very, very nice. Here it has a pretty good texture. I think the diagonal cuts worked a little bit better than the one straight line cut, but you always want to let your bread cool. You don't want to try to slice it or anything like that when it's hot. So we're going to let the bread cool down just for a little bit, and then I like to have this with either some tomato soup or some baked beans. It's a really hearty meal. Thank you for joining me as we bake this bread. I really enjoyed making this video for you guys, and hopefully you all try some of it out and make some good bread. See y'all next time.